So while I'm clearing the board, I want to tell you a little bit about Kim Jong-un's early life, because he spends the 1990s when people are starving. 600,000 to 1 million North Koreans are starving. Kim Jong-un is a boy, so I mean, he can't be morally responsible for anything, but it is crazy contrast that he's not in North Korea, certainly not suffering. He is in Switzerland, attending a private school where a lot of upper middle class, I believe, kids and children of diplomats go to school. And he's living a relatively normal life, except for the fact that he's got people who attend to his every need. And when he wants a new device or something, like the newest, what was going on when I was a kid, when he wants to get the Game Boy Color as opposed to the regular old Game Boy, he can have it in the 90s. I remember when I got my first Game Boy Color, my cousin gave me a black and white Ninja Turtles game. That would have been 1994, 1995. My cousin in Tennessee, who had gotten the original Game Boy, gave me that game. Thank you, Brent, so very much. That's how I know that that's what Kim Jong-un might have been requesting in the 1990s in Switzerland. The point being that Kim Jong-il was out of the country, or Kim Jong-un was out of the country during the worst of the famine. But there's evidence from his former cook that when he came back around the year 2000, that he had some questions. Kim Jong-un asked things like, why are our people's living conditions so bad? And why is the South so prosperous? Let me take back. I think he says, why is Japan so prosperous? So after World War II, how did Japan have this economic miracle? And I am not, to be clear, setting up Kim Jong-un to be some sort of a lover of the people, liberalizer. Not at all. He's just as brutal as his father, and is just as much of a totalitarian at the very least as his father and grandfather. And when his father dies in 2011, Kim Jong-un does some things to prove that he is going to continue on the legacy of the dynasty. One of them is that he has his father made into the permanent general secretary or whatever. The second thing is he goes through the mourning period like Kim Jong-il does when his father dies. And here's the thing that we knew. When we knew that Kim Jong-un was going to be just as brutal and just as totalitarian as his father and grandfather. Song-Taek is his uncle, and is a powerful party apparatchik under Kim Jong-il. And in the lead up to his father's death, Kim Jong-un, well, actually, we don't know. It could have been Kim Jong-il or Kim Jong-un, initiated a purge of Song-Taek. And Kim Jong-il goes to Beijing a few times to make sure that the Hu Jintao is going to accept Kim Jong-un's ascension to power. And so Kim Jong-il is clearly wanting Kim Jong-un to be the successor. And when Kim Jong-un takes power, within a couple years, he has Song-Taek executed. I've actually perpetuated a story that might not be true, where he was actually using anti-aircraft missiles to execute his uncle. The New York Times reported that may be untrue. But the fact that he had his uncle executed is, without a doubt, true. And this was done in his early part of his reign, even though Song-Taek was demoted within the party before Kim Jong-il died, and Kim Jong-un was actually seen with Song-Taek at the funeral procession of his father. There was this thought that maybe Song-Taek would be a power broker within Kim Jong-un's new regime, or that he would share power, or that he would help. He'd be almost like a regent for Kim Jong-un, who was particularly young at this period of time. No, within a couple of years, Kim Jong-un has his uncle killed. So I'm making a cut here because I need to write down a quote. However, when Kim Jong-un takes power, he also does a couple things that distinguishes himself from his father. So he doubles down, just like you would expect, on the cult of personality. He does some purges of like his uncle. However, in 2012, he gives a speech. He gives his first public speech. And first of all, we mentioned that Kim Jong-il didn't give a whole lot of speeches. I think he gave one in his entire time as a supreme leader. Kim Jong-un's going to give a speech in 2012. He's going to start dressing like his grandfather quite a bit. He's a little pudgy. Kim Il-sung became quite pudgy as time went on. He wore those like Mao style suits, those costumes with the gray sweats or whatever. and he starts to emulate his grandfather. And that also means this image is cultivated of him looking a lot like his grandfather and being beloved by the people in the same way Kim Il-sung was beloved. And one of the ways that he sought out to achieve that makes him distinct from his father is through the Byungin philosophy. I think the sun's coming in right now. It might be a little hard to see. Byungin. And the quote that Kim Jong-un gives in his speech, this is a public record, I looked it up. He said that for his reign, it was time for the North Koreans to not tighten belts again. That is, the days of the famine are over, and enjoy wealth and prosperity of socialism. Enjoy the wealth and prosperity of socialism. It's the Byungin philosophy. So in 2012, the new great successor is saying that we can have socialism and we can have a nuclear program, which is the second arm of Byungin. So now that we have a nuclear program, we can also relax the military first philosophy and actually just enjoy the fact that we're secure, national security wise, and that people should be able to live better lives. And so there's a couple things that I want to point out here. So let's go with the official sort of narrative of things, the common understanding of things right now. The common understanding is that when Kim Jong-un makes this announcement, that immediately he goes about a process of doing a big building boom in Pyongyang and other cities, building bars, water parks, a dolphinarium, like amusement parks, movie theaters, that basically the goal becomes to give people a better standard of living, at least the upper class, those core people that we talked about earlier, and that the material benefits of the Korean people should be prioritized, almost a rejection of Juche to a certain extent, because it's about what is physically happening in the world and trying to make that better for Korean people, as opposed to just if you can dream it, you can make it reality, or whatever that Kim Il-sung was going at. And one of the things that people always reference when they're talking about this change is like, oh, Kim Jong-un had like a water slide built, and there's this famous image of him like inspecting a water slide at a water park with like multiple colors of slides. I have a small thing to point out here, though, is that I actually have watched a propaganda video, and I'll try to put up a couple seconds of it here, where Kim Jong-il has made a film, and he is talking, it's a propaganda film. There's Mount Paektu at the beginning, as we'd expect, that legendary mountain. And then there is a couple lines about how Kim Jong-il and Kim Il-sung wanted to make lives better for people. And so Kim Jong-il helped Kim Il-sung build some water entertainment for the people. And there's an image of water slides. So the idea that this is a totally new innovation, not true. Because I am going to put up B-roll of something from like the 90s where they're already having this conversation. However, it's becoming, the evidence says that this is becoming much more real in the era of Kim Jong-un, that you can find a lot more black markets, that you can physically see, like people who go to Pyongyang say there's a lot more construction that's been happening, and there's a lot, like prosperity is kind of emerging. There is a standard of living that is increasing, and that Kim Jong-un is part of this. And I've seen it almost posited as though like Kim Jong-un is actually a reformer, an opener up a little bit of North Korea. I think that's taking it a little too far, particularly when you think about the fact that the totalitarian regime overall of this remains, and that, you know, if Kim Jong-un's sister, who's currently the most obvious person to replace him when he dies, even though he's still relatively young, he does have some health issues that would make us think that maybe his sister would take power sooner rather than later. Anyway, all this can be taken away because the totalitarian regime is still there, right? So there's a sense that there's a new generation, the millennial generation, North Koreans who are less interested in the propaganda of the cult of personality, are more interested in South Korean films. There's been a crackdown on people who bring in films, distribute films, watch films from South Korea on like portable DVD players in North Korea. There is still strict control on things, like even though there are mobile phones in North Korea now for some of the core class, that there's an intranet, not an internet, just for North Korea with government approved and created websites. So, you know, if I had to describe it, I'd say it almost looks a little bit more like, it looks a little bit more like East Germany, or maybe the better example is probably like the China under Deng Xiaoping, Jiang Zemin, and Hu Jintao. That was a little bit more open, but still the monopoly of power in those places resided nonetheless with the Communist Party. And even though material benefits continue to increase in China under Xi Jinping, the liberalization projects, any political liberalization has been clawed back aggressively. And in Kim Jong-un's case, the political liberalization, even relatively speaking, has never occurred. And nonetheless, there's these material benefits that make Kim Jong-un different from his father and grandfather. At least the later years of Kim Il-sung, and then, Kim Jong-il basically, until his death, like North Korea was just, on the brink of collapse. A couple more points I want to make about Kim Jong-un deal with foreign policy. The nuclear testing continues. So after his father died, there's nuclear tests. There's some sort of bare bones agreement with the Obama administration for aid for suspending plutonium enrichment. And then immediately, like literally weeks later, they launch a satellite in quotes. A lot of people think it was an ICBM test. So everything falls apart. Kim Jong-un is testing nukes, is testing new longer range missiles, things that can go 4,000, 6,000 miles, things that could actually hit the United States. There's a propaganda image posted of him and his generals looking at different targets in the USA to possibly hit. So the nuclear program is full steam ahead. And you might be wondering, what about the era of Donald Trump? Didn't they meet in 2018? And the answer is yes. They exchanged threats, if you remember, the fire and fury quote from Trump on Twitter back in the day, saying that, if North Korea doesn't watch out, fire and fury is coming. He talked about having a bigger nuclear button than Kim Jong-un. I don't know what that was referring to in figurative terms. And he called him Little Rocket Man or something at the UN General Assembly. And it really felt like things were in really bad shape at that moment. But then Kim Jong-il and Trump actually had a meeting in 2018. Trump did his bow to the North Korean general, and they became friends. They met again in 2019 in Hanoi, and then they actually had an exchange at the DMZ that same year, where President Trump became the first American president to step foot in North Korea. Pretty extraordinary, except that there is no evidence whatsoever that this did anything to deter North Korea from developing its nuclear weapons program. That it continued to roll ahead, testing continued, and there was basically no step back whatsoever. No concrete things were agreed. The only thing that we can say is that the personal animosity between the two was gone, and they became friends afterward. Very goofy. And so the answer is that the nuclear program is full steam ahead in the Kim Jong-un years, despite anything that might appear to the contrary through the Trump negotiations. There's basically been no change. And now it's almost just like an acceptance around across the board that North Korea is a nuclear state. That gives the regime a lot of confidence and a lot of stability, which leads me to my last point about Kim Jong-un as we approach the present, which is that Kim Jong-un has picked up the baton of triangulation between what's now Russia and China in the tradition of his father and his grandfather. There are these images of Kim Jong-un in 2018. Before he met Trump, he actually met Xi Jinping. There was this feeling that the only reason that China was allowing North Korea to still exist in like the 90s and 2000s and 2010s was because they didn't want an American proxy state in South Korea on their Chinese border. And so it was just enough help for whatever North Korea needed to not collapse and nothing more. But then there's this meeting where Kim Jong-un goes to China and sees Xi before Kim Jong-un meets President Trump. And who knows what sort of things were exchanged there. And then a year later, in 2019, Kim Jong-un makes his first visit to Russia. And then Vladimir Putin comes to Pyongyang. And then later on in 2022, Vladimir Putin invades Ukraine. And in 2023, Kim Jong-un praises that invasion and promises assistance to Vladimir Putin. First, it was ammunition, and literally it became soldiers, North Korean soldiers fighting for Russia in Ukraine, of all places. And you start to see this triangulation again, because now in this year, in September, there was the 80th anniversary parade of the Chinese victory over Japan in World War II. And Xi Jinping, for his parade, he's the one wearing his Mao costume, and Kim Jong-un is invited wearing a Western suit. And to the right, if I remember the order of Xi Jinping, is Vladimir Putin. And so there's this trifecta going on. And we could talk about the wider reasons why this tripartite alliance makes a lot of sense, but this is probably the closest these three powers have been since ever. It's kind of incredible, actually. And I think when you look at the modern North Korean state, you should look at actually a state that's acting pretty confident. Kim Jong-un's been in power for over a decade. He's clearly improved relations with China. He's improved relations with Vladimir Putin and Russia. He's making public appearances in a way that Xi Jinping wants him by his side in some of his most, publicly facing moments. This is something that would never have occurred under Mao. Never would have occurred under Deng Xiaoping, Jiang Zemin, Hu Jintao. The Soviet relations with North Korea ebbed and flowed as well. The Khrushchev era, you can't imagine it. Stalin, always wanted to be top dog. And anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is that Kim Jong-un is actually probably, if appearance is reality, he's probably the most savvy of the three. I mean, geopolitically speaking, Kim Il-sung was a master navigator, obviously a guerrilla fighter. He is the founder of North Korea, so you can't write him off. Kim Jong-il has often been written off as a weirdo, but as I think we've established, he basically made his cult of personality, his one-man totalitarian dictatorship, survive on life support at the true bottom of global communism. So I don't think we can write off Kim Il-sung or Kim Jong-il either. But Kim Jong-un is looking very confident, and the only things that we can say is that internally, there's concerns in North Korea about the escape of information, about the proliferation of media, and having control over a very rudimentary intranet instead of the internet. But Kim Jong-un is leading a. Sorry, I keep saying obviously my brain's getting a little tired here, but when you think back to the early days of Kim Jong-un, when he had Dennis Rodman in town 3-4 times, the Chicago Bulls star from the 90s. The only reason that stopped is because Dennis Rodman started acting like a crazy, druggy, drunk person. But that was a bit of swagger from Kim Jong-un early in his regime to be having celebrities and powerful people come to him and then to open up North Korea a little bit to black markets, and to continue to push on this nuclear program until a point where he and his regime feel secure enough to go around and be confident on the world stage with Xi and Trump and Putin, to meet and smile with South Korea's President Moon, if I'm not mistaken. I think that far from collapsing, we should be looking at a moment where North Korea is fitting quite well into this illiberal world that's developing, where modern democracy, contrary to the expectation that the fall of the wall in 1989 and the fall of the Soviet Union marked the end of history, that actually, no, liberal democracy right now is in a really difficult moment, and North Korea is fitting quite well into this illiberal world. Fukuyama, if you read The End of History, which I did in undergrad, so it's been a while, but actually people always dunk on him as being like, it wasn't the end of history, bro. Like, obviously liberal democracy was going to see challenges again. Autocracy and dictatorships weren't over. Fukuyama didn't argue literally that it was the end of history. It was just saying that this is the moment when liberal democracy was ascendant, and that, their challenges might come. So that was never his thesis, but we're getting a little off topic here. I think we should consider the flexibility of North Korea under a single man depends on how flexible that man is. And so Kim Jong-il was highly inflexible, and it's honestly a testament to just how horrific the cult of personality was and the control of the totalitarianism. The fact that there's overlapping state security agencies like the Ministry of State Security and the Ministry of Social Security that run these prison camps, that there's that there's really no checks and balances whatsoever, even within the party state. So there's no consultative Leninism like you would find in China under Xi Jinping. There's no liberal wing. There's no conservative wing that we know of. There's just this one-man rule. And so Kim Jong-un looks, contrary to expectation, to be quite a nimble navigator. He and his sister seem to be quite good at building soft power around the world. And so therefore the North Korean regime is looking pretty flexible right now. But on the other hand, history can move in another direction, and there's no guarantee that our illiberal moment will last forever. And the open question will be, what will North Korea do in that period afterwards? A lot comes down to the personalities. Like I said, if Kim Jong-un doesn't live a long and prosperous life because of some of his weight issues, then maybe his sister will take over, and we don't know. There's a biography called The Sister that came out a couple years ago on his sister, whose name evades me at the moment, but she doesn't seem to be a particularly liberal lady. So we could expect that if she were to take power, she'd be just as brutal. And so the relative opening up under Un might end. So I'm going to put a full list of sources below, but before we wrapped up, I did want to just hold up on the screen. These are the sources. God, that sun's bright. These are the sources that were the most important to me. I'll list them first in the description that helped me in this. I do not have an encyclopedic memory. I have lots of notes here. I read a lot of books to help me. I've got, like, this is one of the books on Kim Jong-un, the great successor, that I was reading. Yes, he's wearing sunglasses on the cover. But, Accidental Tyrant was important to me. Exit Emperor Kim was important to me. Becoming Kim Jong-un was actually particularly useful for understanding all three of these men, even though it's ostensibly a biography on Kim Jong-un. So there's an intellectual background here, and because North Korea is so closed, the work that these people do to look at archives in other countries, for example, to look at like the Soviet archives when they were opened in the 90s and determine things about North Korea, incredibly important. And so I don't want to end this video without saying thank you to those who did the intellectual work to allow me to make a video like this and talk for a long period of time about North Korea.